In 2026, a security breach isn't a matter of days, it's a matter of minutes. As the latest data shows, the window from initial access to data exfiltrations has collapsed to just 72 minutes. For cybersecurity professionals, this means the traditional detect and react model is officially obsolete. We're now in the era of machine speed threats, and our defense must keep pace. Hello, my name is Alan Lee, and I'm joined by my classmate Dylan Bass to present our final project for Cyber 200 on the topic of AI-driven insider threat detection, balancing security and privacy. Our objective today is to provide a strategic roadmap for cybersecurity leadership. We'll explore how to leverage artificial intelligence to neutralize insider threats at machine speed while navigating the complex ethical mandate to protect individual privacy and fulfill increasingly strict global legal requirements. The insider threat is no longer just a technical problem. It's a social technical one. As we have seen in recent years, the malicious insider often leaves a trail of digital signals, from shifts in communication sentiment to anomalous file access, long before an actual breach occurs. However, having the technical capacity to monitor these signals doesn't always grant us the legal or ethical right to do so. We are here to show you how to build a trust architecture that satisfies the stakeholders. When we look at security landscape today, the first thing we have to acknowledge is that the perimeter has effectively collapsed. We're no longer just building high walls to keep people out. We are managing a network where the threat is already inside the networks. Whether they're disgruntled employees or a hardworking employee who fell victim to sophisticated phishing campaign. Unit 42. The Global Threat Intelligence and Incident Response Division of Palo Alto Networks, from their Global Incident Response Report, painted a dire picture. Exfiltration speeds have quadrupled. We are seeing attacks move from initial access to full data theft in a matter of minutes. Unit 42 simulated an AI-assisted attack that reduced time to exfiltration down to 25 minutes. Real-world IR data reflects this acceleration. The fastest 25% of intrusions reached exfiltration in just 72 minutes, down from 285 minutes in the prior year. Traditional rules-based security, the if this, then that logic, simply cannot scale to this velocity. It's too static, too slow, and it lacks the context required to distinguish between a productive employee and a compromised identity. This is why the landscape has shifted toward behavioral analytics. In my role, I see that we have moved away from looking for malware signatures and toward looking for behavioral drift. Think of it as establishing a digital DNA or fingerprint for every user. We are monitoring how, when, and why people interact with data. If a systems engineer who typically works 9 to 5 suddenly starts querying sensitive HR databases or encrypted source code at 3 a.m. from a new VPN, that isn't a virus. It's a behavioral anomaly. In a modern environment, identity is the new perimeter because with remote access, employee can work from almost anywhere. And intent is a new firewall because each employee has a set of resources that he or she should be accessing based on their roles. By monitoring intent, we are moving from technical logging to human profiling, where every keystroke and every sentiment is a data point. The challenge for us isn't just how do we catch the thief or how do we block the bad guys from accessing the resources, but how do we do it without destroying the culture of trust and the legal right to privacy? Over the next 40 minutes, Dylan and I will show you how we navigate that thin line between effective security and invasive surveillance. Now that we have established the high velocity landscape of 2026, let's look at the current technology of modern detection at our disposal. The foundational technology here is UEBA, or User and Entity Behavior Analytics. Unlike the typical static if-then rules of the past, UEBA uses machine learning to build a multi-dimensional baseline for every person and every device in the network. It tracks hundreds of variables, everything from typical login times and geolocation to file access frequency and even keystroke dynamics. By 2026 standards, UEBA has moved beyond simply anomaly detection. It now functions as a digital twin of an employee's professional habits. When a user's activities deviates from this profile, the system doesn't just block them. It begins a contextual evaluation. That transition from gatekeeper to observer is what makes modern security functional. The digital twin approach addresses the biggest failure of legacy systems, the inability to account for human nuance. Products like Exabeam is often cited as a leader in this behavioral storytelling approach. Instead of sending 1,000 separate alerts for a single user, it automatically stitches every activity, logins, file access, badgings into a single user timeline. If a user suddenly accesses a sensitive database, Exabeam doesn't just block them. It looks at the preceding events, like an unusual login location or a change in MFA device, to assign a dynamic risk score. The second pillar is natural language processing, the NLP. This is perhaps the most oh, shit. Yeah. Now that we have seen the how, let's talk about the strategic why. The single greatest technical advantage of AI in this space is contextual intelligence. Contextual intelligence is the connective tissue that transforms isolated log entries into a coherent narrative of intent by correlating behavioral baselines with emotional sentiment. And the relational graph data, it allows system to distinguish between a productive employee and a quiet insider by evaluating the why behind a deviation rather than just the action itself. This shift moves security from a series of static tripwires to a dynamic predictive evaluations of human risk. In the old world of legacy security, we rely on binary rules. For example, if a user downloads more than 1 GB of data, block them. The problem is that a software engineer might download 5 gigs of libraries every Tuesday as part of their normal workflow, while a salesperson downloading 500 megs of customer list is a huge problem. Although not 100%, AI solves the false positive or cry wolf problem. It understands that late night coding session is a productive search, while a similar search from the finance department is a red flag. By moving from binary blocking to risk-based evaluation, we allow the business to move fast without the security team consistently tripping the emergency brake. The second strategic advantage relates directly back to that Unit 42 report I mentioned earlier. If we only have a 72-minute window before data is exfiltrated, we cannot wait for human analysts to wake up, drink coffee, and log into a console to start investigating the potential security incident. AI offers zero dwell time, meaning it can detect, correlate, and respond in milliseconds. But more importantly, it serves as a massive force multiplier. Cybersecurity teams are chronically understaffed in many companies. We are drowning in noise. AI acts as a first-tier analyst, filtering out 95% of the background radiation of normal anomalies so that cybersecurity analysts can focus on their human expertise on the remaining 5% that represents a sophisticated threat. It's not just about replacing humans. It's about making humans scalable. Finally, let's look at this through the economic lens. Every security control has a friction cost. If our security is too heavy, the business loses agility. If it's too light, we lost the company's crown jewels. AI-driven detection allows for operational continuity. By using micro interventions like stepped-up authentication instead of a full account lockout, we preserve the user experience while mitigating risk. Strategically, this aligns security with the business bottom line. It reduces the expected cost of a breach while minimizing the cost of security friction. However, as we move into the next phase of our presentation, we must ask, at what point does this technical efficiency become a legal liability? Because as we are about to see in our case studies, having the technical capability to monitor everything doesn't always mean you have the legal right to do so. Now let's take a look at one of the most cited cases of internal sabotage in recent years. The 2018 Tesla incident involved Martin Tripp. Tripp was a process technician at the Nevada Gigafactory who became disgruntled after his manager gave him a poor review, stating that Tripp was having problem with job performance and at times being disruptive and combative with his colleagues. He was then assigned to a new role. Later, he allegedly wrote software to hack Tesla's manufacturing operating systems, or MOS, and exported gigabytes of confidential data, including photos and videos of manufacturing processes, to outside entities. Tesla has also discovered that Tripp authored hacking software and installed it onto 3 other computers in the company so that confidential data could be persistently exported off its network to unknown third parties. This isn't an external hacker breaking in. This was a trusted employee using his legitimate credentials to intentionally damage the company's crown jewels. From a security perspective, this is the ultimate nightmare. The threat is coming from within the trusted network. What makes this classic insider threat case is the why. Tripp didn't wake up one day and decide to be a threat. There was a clear path of behavioral drift. He expressed anger that he was reassigned, leading to a visible shift from a somewhat loyal employee to a malicious insider. In 2018, Tesla's security was largely reactive. They caught the breach after the data was gone and after the software was modified. But if we apply the AI technologies we discussed in slide 3, specifically the sentimental analysis, to this scenario, the signals were there. A modern AI system could have identified the shift in Tripp's internal communications, his growing anger and disengagement, long before he touched the production code. Now, take a look at the technical detection points. Even if we ignore the sentiment of his emails, his technical actions were a series of red flags. As a technician, Tripp had access to the system, but his write activity to the core MOS source code was a massive deviation from his professional DNA. The export of gigabytes of data to unauthorized external endpoints, like personal cloud storage, happened at a volume and velocity that were statistically impossible for his role. An AI-driven UEBA system would have correlated these two events in real time. It won't have waited for a manual audit. It would have seen the behavioral anomaly, the who, what, and when, and could have automatically throttled his access the moment the export began. The economic and reputational cost for Tesla was massive, involving years of litigation and public scrutiny. This case proves that trust is not a security control. Strategically, the Tesla case shows us that identifying an insider requires looking for the intersection of motive and opportunity. AI gives us the visibility to see the motive in the behavioral data and the opportunity in technical logs. But as we'll see in our next case study with Waymo and Uber, the line between high-performance work and malicious exfiltration is often very thin, and that is where AI precision becomes a legal necessity. The Waymo versus Uber case is the definitive study on intellectual property theft. In 2016, Anthony Lewandowski, an engineer at Google's self-driving unit, Waymo, downloaded over 14,000 highly sensitive files, including proprietary LiDAR designs, just before resigning to start his own company called Otto, a self-driving truck startup, which was later acquired by Uber in August 2016 for approximately $680 million. This is the most expensive insider case in history, resulting in a $245 million settlement and a criminal conviction for Lewandowski. But from our perspective as engineers, the most important detail is that Lewandowski didn't hack Google. He was a power user. He had legitimate high-level access to every one of those files as part of his daily job. And this is where traditional security fails. A standard data loss prevention tool usually relies on thresholds. If you set the threshold too low, you're consistently blocking your engineers from doing their work. If you set it too high, you will miss malicious data exfiltration by someone like Lewandowski. Because he was a rock star engineer, his normal activities already involved large data transfers. In a traditional system, he was invisible. The insider knows the rules and the thresholds better than the security team does. They know exactly how to walk right up to that line without crossing it. But let's look at how the AI technologies we've discussed would have changed the outcome. A UEBA system doesn't just look at this as a large download. It looks at the relative anomaly. Even for a high performer like Lewandowski, downloading 40,000 files in a single 24-hour window right before a resignation is a massive statistic spike. By correlating his access patterns with HR status, an AI system would have flagged this in real time. It would have recognized that while he could access the data, the velocity and volume of this specific session were completely outside his 7 years historical baseline. It moves the detection from did he have permission to is this behavior consistent with his role? From the economic impact of trade secret theft angle, Waymo didn't just lost files. They lost their competitive advantage in a multi-billion-dollar market. This case forced the industry to rethink the trust but verify model. Strategically, it shows that even your most valuable employees are potential risks. But as we pivot to the next session on legal and privacy constraints, which is our core topic of this project, we must ask, if we give AI the keys to the kingdom to stop a 72-minute attack, how do we ensure it doesn't accidentally log out the wrong people or wrongly accuse an employee of wrongdoing due to mishap in the AI black box? More importantly, how do we ensure that privacy and fundamental rights are not being violated? Now that we have made the technical case for machine speed detection, we have to address the legal reality of where that technology lives. We're going to start with Europe because their framework is the most restrictive and, frankly, the most influential globally. In the EU, privacy is not just a consumer right, it is a fundamental human right protected by the Charter of Fundamental Rights. This means that an employer's desire for security does not automatically override an employee's right to private life. As a security engineer, I have to view the GDPR not as a checklist, but as a primary constraint on the architecture of our AI systems, especially for companies that have employees located in European Union countries. The foundational case for our project is Babulescu v. Romania, a 2017 ruling by the European Court of Human Rights. While it predates our modern AI tools, it established a five-part test that every monitoring system must pass to be legal in the EU, including prior notice, meaning did you tell the employee exactly what was being monitored? Also, scope. Was the monitoring limited to what was strictly necessary? And the legitimate interest. Is there a less intrusive way to achieve the security goal? In the case of AI-driven sentiment analysis, where we are monitoring our employees' Slack tone to find disgruntlement, the Babulescu standard asks, is there a way to find the insider without reading their private communications? If the answer is yes, then the AI monitoring is likely illegal. Under this ruling, always-on surveillance is almost never considered proportionate. Then we have GDPR Article 22, which is specifically designed to combat the black box problem. It grants individuals the right not to be subject to a decision based solely on automated processing if that decision has a significant effect on them. Think about the adaptive risk scoring. We discussed in slide 3, if an AI flags an employee as a 99% risk and the system automatically suspends their access, leading to an HR investigation, that is a significant effect. Under Article 22, the employee has a right to an explanation. They can demand to know the logic behind the flag. If our AI is a black box, that can't explain why it flagged them. We are in direct violation of the law. This is why we argue that a human in the loop is not just an ethical choice. It's a GDPR mandate. If your AI flags an employee and the system automatically locks them out or triggers a disciplinary file, you must be able to explain the logic, provide a human analysis. Without these two things, a high-precision AI detection system becomes a massive legal liability in any jurisdiction governed by the GDPR. I would like to mention the EU AI Act, which was fully implemented just a few months ago. It officially classifies AI use for workplace monitoring as high risk. For private employers using AI to monitor their own staff, the company must inform workers and their representatives, like unions, before the system is put into service. The company must also assign competent, trained humans to oversee the outputs from the AI monitoring systems. Due to the nature of AI, the data being collected is likely subjected to GDPR Article 35 because the AI processes personal data in a way that is likely to result in a high risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. And EU AI Act Article 27, which is required for the deployer of high-risk AI system to assess the impact on foundational rights, for example, human dignity and respect for private life and data protection. Strategically, this creates a massive compliance burden for the AI tools. It forces us to ask, can we afford the legal risk of this visibility? In the EU, the answer is often no, unless the security need is extreme. As we pivot to the US landscape in the next slide, you'll see a very different philosophy, one that prioritizes property over privacy, and that creates the central dilemma for global chief information security officers.
Now we're going to shift from Europe over to the United States because the way privacy is handled is actually very different. In the United States, privacy in the workplace is usually treated more like a contract instead of a basic human right. What that means is if the company owns the laptop, like the network and the systems, for example, Slack or email, They generally have the legal right to monitor what happens on those systems. The idea is supported by legal research such as quote unquote workplace privacy and employee monitoring in the United States by Matthew Finklin, where he explains that employer control over systems gives them broad monitoring authority. But the key idea here is notice and consent. As long as employees are informed that monitoring is happening, usually through employee handbooks or policy, companies are allowed to deploy monitoring tools, including AI systems. A major case that I want to mention that supports this is the City of Ontario versus Kwan in 2010. In this case, the United States Supreme Court ruled that employers can monitor work devices if it is for legitimate work-related purposes and not overly intrusive. According to the Supreme Court opinion written by Justice Kennedy, the search was actually considered reasonable because it was tied to workplace efficiency. However, this is starting to change, especially in California. Laws like the California Consumer Privacy Act, introduced by the California state legislature, and then later expanded by the California Privacy Rights Act, gives employees more control over their data. According to quote unquote the California Consumer Privacy Act, a practical guide by Baker McKenzie, employees now have the right to know what data is being collected and how it is being used. Additionally, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has released guidance on AI and algorithmic bias. In quote unquote assessing adverse impact in software, algorithms, and artificial intelligence used in employment selection procedures, the EEOC warns that AI systems that disproportionately impact certain groups can lead to legal consequences. So the main takeaway is that while the US allows more monitoring than Europe, companies still grow legal pressure around transparency as well as accountability. Now we're going to be getting into the human side of this because everything we talked about before sounds powerful, but it also comes with real trade-offs. This idea of digital panopticon comes from an older concept. It was first created by Jeremy Bentham and later explained more by Michael Foucault in his book Discipline and Punish. The idea is simple. When people feel like they are always being watched, they start to change how they act, even if no one is actually watching them at that moment. And that's exactly what's happening in modern workplaces. With AI systems tracking logins, as well as messages and behavioral patterns, employees know they are being monitored. Over time, that creates pressure. People start thinking twice before they say something, or before they click something, or even before they work in a certain way. The first issue here is interference risk. That just means that AI tries to figure out things about your personal life based on your behavior at work. According to the article, quote unquote, Privacy and Human Behavior in the Age of Information by Alessandro Acquisti, even small changes in behavior can reveal private things like stress or personal problems. So, for example, if someone suddenly starts working late at night or logs in from a new location, the system might flag that as suspicious. But in reality, that person could just be dealing with something normal in their life. Maybe they're tired or they just had family issues. The AI doesn't really understand the full situation. It just sees a change and it reacts to it. This is where the line between security and privacy starts to get very blurry. The system is trying to protect the company, but at the same time, it's learning things about employees that never need to be shared. The second issue is the chilling effect. This is when people change their behavior because they know they are being watched. There's a study called quote unquote chilling effects, online surveillance, and Wikipedia use by John Penny that shows people are less likely to speak freely when they know they are being monitored. In a workplace, that means employees stop being open, they stop sharing ideas, they they avoid saying anything that could be misunderstood, and they just really try to play it safe. That might sound like a small issue, but over time it hurts teamwork and overall creativity. And it could actually make security worse. When people don't feel comfortable using company systems, they start moving conversations somewhere else. Whether it be through personal phones or through texting like WhatsApp. Once that happens, the company loses visibility almost completely. So instead of improving security, too much monitoring can push activity into places where there is no security at all. This idea is also talked about in quote unquote The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. She explains that when companies monitor people so much, it starts to break down trust, and once trust is gone, it's very hard to get it back. So the main takeaway from this slide is pretty simple. AI gives us a lot of visibility, which is good for security, but if we go too far, people stop trusting the system. They stop communicating openly and they change how they work. And when that happens, the company doesn't just lose trust, it can actually become less secure overall. Now we're going to talk about one of the biggest risks when using AI in security, and that is false accusations. In normal cybersecurity, when we hear the term false positive, it usually just means the system made a mistake. Maybe it flagged something that wasn't actually a threat. But in this situation, it's very different. A false positive is not just a system error, it's a real person being labeled as a threat. And that can have serious consequences. It can trigger an investigation, damage someone's reputation, create unnecessary stress, and in some cases, even lead to suspension or even termination. So this isn't just a technical issue anymore, it's a human issue. The first problem on this slide is automation bias. This is when people trust the system too much just because it's AI. When a system gives a high risk score like 90 or 99%, people naturally assume it must be correct. There's a study called quote unquote automation bias in decision making by Mosier and Skitka that explains this. It shows that people tend to rely on automated systems even when they shouldn't. So instead of questioning the result or looking deeper, they just accept it. In a workplace, that becomes dangerous. If an AI system flags an employee as high risk, a manager might believe it right away without taking the time to understand the full situation. The system starts to replace human judgment instead of supporting it. The next issue is what we call the black box problem. This is when the AI gives an answer, but no one really understands how it got there. There's a book called The Black Box Society by Frank Pasquale that talks about this. He explains that many systems are very complex, so they can produce results, but they can't clearly explain the reasoning behind those results. So if someone is flagged as a threat, it can be very hard for them to defend themselves. They might not even know what behavior caused the alert. It becomes a situation where the system says something is wrong, but no one can fully explain why. We've also seen real-world examples of this. In the 2026 case study, Angela Lips versus Fargo authorities, an AI system incorrectly identified someone as a suspect even though there were signs that the system might not be accurate, people still trusted it too much. That led to serious consequences for someone who did nothing wrong. This shows us something really important. Even if AI is correct most of the time, the small percentage of times when it is wrong can still cause major harm. And those systems are not even distributed. They affect real people in real ways. Another thing to think about is how this changes the workplace environment. If employees know that a system could flag them at any time, they might start worrying about how every action looks. They might feel like they have to constantly prove that they are not doing anything wrong. That creates stress and lowers trust. Instead of focusing on their work, people might start focusing on how to avoid being flagged by the system. That's not a healthy environment. So the main takeaway from this slide is pretty simple. AI can be very helpful, especially for detecting threats quickly, but it should never be the final decision maker on its own. There's always it always needs to be a human involved to review the situation, so it can understand the context and make a fair decision. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about systems or data, it's about real data and real consequences. We're moving into solutions because up at this point, we talked a lot about the risks. So the question is, how do we actually use AI in a safe and responsible way? This is where the NIST AI Risk Management Framework comes in. This framework was created by the National Institute of Standards and Technology and it is designed to help organizations use AI in a way that is safe, fair, and reliable. The main focus of this framework is what you see on the slide: trustworthiness, explainability, and reliability. So let's talk about that in simple terms. When we say trustworthiness, we mean that people should be able to trust the system, not just that it works, but that it works in a fair and consistent way. Employees should feel like the system is not randomly targeting them or making unfair decisions. When we say explainability, this is really important. It means the system should be able to explain why it made a decision. So if an AI flags someone as a risk, there should be a clear reason behind it. It shouldn't just be a number or a score with no explanation. And then reliability means the system should work the same way over time. It shouldn't give different results for the same behavior or break under certain conditions. All of this comes from the official document, quote unquote, Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Framework, AI RMF 1.0, published by NIST. The goal is to make sure AI systems are not just powerful, but also safe to use in real environments. Now, the second part of the slide talks about application, which is how we actually use this in the real world. The framework says we need to map and measure AI risk. Mapping just means understanding what the system is doing. What data is it using? What decisions is it making? Where could it go wrong? When measuring means testing it, we need to check if the system is biased, if it's accurate, and if it's making fair decisions across different people. This is really important in something like insider threat detection because the system is making decisions about employees. If it's not tested properly, it could unfairly flag someone or miss a real threat. Another key idea here is keeping the system safe for employees. That means we're not just protecting the company, we're also protecting the people inside it. So instead of just asking, does the system catch threats, we also need to ask, is the system fair? Is it clean? Is it clear? Can people understand it? And one of the biggest takeaways from this framework is that AI should not run on its own. There should always be some level of human involvement, especially for important decisions. This slide is really about balance. Yes, we want strong security. Yes, we want fast detection, but we also need systems that people can trust and feel comfortable working under. Because if employees don't trust the system, then the system itself starts to become a problem instead of a solution. I'll be going over regulation, basically the rules around how AI can be used. This slide focuses on the EU AI Act, which is one of the newest and most important laws when it comes to artificial intelligence. And even though it comes from Europe, it affects companies all over the world. The first key idea here is classification. Under the EU AI Act, systems that are used for workplace monitoring, like tracking employee behavior or detecting insider threats, are labeled as high-risk AI. That label is a big deal because it means companies can't just turn these systems on and use them however they want. They have to follow strict rules and after they deploy them. One of the biggest requirements is something called a Fundamental Right Impact Assessment, or FRIA. In simple terms, this means the company has to stop and ask, is this system going to harm people's rights? So before using the AI, they have to look at things like, could this system invade someone's privacy? Could it treat certain people unfairly? Could it make wrong decisions that impact someone's job? They have to think through all of that before the system is being used. Another big requirement is human oversight. That means the AI cannot be the final decision maker on its own. There always has to be a human involved, especially when the decision could affect someone's career. So if the system flags an employee as a risk, it can't just automatically take action like locking them out or reporting them. A real person has to review the situation first. This connects directly to what we talked about in the last slide with false accusations. The law is basically saying you can use AI, but you still need human judgment. There are also rules around data quality. The system has to be trained on good, accurate data. If the system is biased or incomplete, the system could make unfair decisions. So companies are responsible for making sure the data they use is reliable. Another important part is transparency. Companies need to be able to explain how their AI system works. If an employee is affected by a decision, they could be able to understand why that decision was made. So overall, this law is trying to balance things. It's not just saying don't use AI, but it's saying you need to use it carefully and responsibly. The main takeaway from this slide is that AI is no longer just a technical tool, it's something that is now regulated. And companies have to think about legal, ethical, and human impacts before using it. Because if they don't, the risks are not just technical anymore, they can become problems very quickly. Slide focuses on ISO IEC 42001, which is a newer standard specifically designed for managing AI systems. A lot of people are familiar with ISO 27001 for security, but this is different. This one is focused completely on AI. The main idea here is creating something called an Artificial Intelligence Management System, or AIMS. In simple terms, this means AI is not just something you turn on and forget about. It has to be managed like a full system, just like security or IT operations. So instead of just asking, does this AI work, we're asking, how is this AI being used over time? Who's responsible for it, and what are the risks? One of the biggest ideas in this framework is managing the life cycle of the AI system. That means everything from when the system is first built to when it is being used, or even when it is being updated or replaced. This is important because AI systems change over time. The data changes, the behavior changes, and the risk changes. So if you don't manage it properly, the system can slowly become unreliable or even unsafe. Now, the key takeaway on this slide is something called function creep. This is when a system that was built for one purpose slowly starts being used for other things. For example, let's say we build an AI system to detect insider threats. That's its main purpose. But over time, someone might say, hey, we can also use this to track employee performance, or we can use this to monitor productivity. Now the system is doing more than it was originally designed for. And that's where problems start, because the system was not built or tested for those new uses, and it might start affecting employees in ways that were never intended. ISO 42001 helps prevent that by forcing organizations to clearly define what the AI is supposed to do, and just as important, what it's not supposed to do. It also requires accountability. There needs to be clear ownership of the system, so if anything goes wrong, it's not just the AI made a mistake. There are actual people responsible for managing it. Another important part is transparency. Organizations should be able to explain how the system works, how it is being used, and how decisions are being made. Now, to close everything out, we're going to talk about what leadership should actually do moving forward. At this point, we've seen both sides. AI is very powerful when it comes to security, especially with how fast attacks happen today. But we've also seen the risks, such as privacy issues, false accusations, and loss of trust. So the goal here is to not stop using AI. The goal is to use it the right way. The first recommendation is human in the loop. That just means AI should help make decisions, but it should not make the final decision on its own. AI is great at spotting patterns and moving quickly, but it doesn't understand context the way humans do. So if a system flags something as a risk, a real person should always review that before any serious action is taken. The second recommendation is radical transparency. This means being clear with employees about what is being monitored and why. If people don't understand how the system works, they start to lose trust. But if you explain it clearly, what data is being used, what the system is looking for, it helps build that trust back. This idea is supported in the article, quote unquote, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, where she explains that trust breaks down when people feel like systems are hidden or working against them. So being open about it actually helps both security and employee confidence. The third recommendation is privacy by design. This means privacy is built into the system from the start instead of being added later. So instead of collecting as much data as possible, companies should only collect what they actually need. Techniques like limiting data or protecting it through methods like differential privacy help reduce risk. The idea here is simple. Just because we can collect certain data doesn't mean we should. When you combine these three ideas, human in the loop, transparency, and privacy by design, you start to get a system that is not just effective, but also fair and trusted. And that's really the main takeaway for leadership. AI is not just a technical tool anymore, it's something that affects people directly. So decisions around AI are not just about security, they're also about trust, fairness, and responsibility. If companies get that balance right, AI could be a huge advantage. But if they ignore it, it can become a problem instead of a solution.